Hello folks, welcome to the canal Chano Jose. Today we're gonna share with you and we chose 7 things that can get you stranded on the side of the road. And then we don't pay attention to so many things. There's so many things on the car, but there's really basic stuff and really basic mistakes that gets you stranded on the side of the road, and then you have to call a tow truck or a friend. And just because you didn't pay attention to these things, and they're the most simple things that can get you in big trouble in the side of the road. And with that said, let's get started and we'll show you what we mean by that. And the first reason we end up in the side of the road is because we forgot to check our cooling system or levels on our liquid, and we end up with overheat engine in the side of the road, and by then it's too late. This is the most simple thing that a lot of people end up in the side of the road because they forgot to check before they went on a big trip, or just frequently to check the levels on their liquids. And it's as simple as just buying 1 gallon of distilled water, throw it on your car, keep it in there. You can drink it or you can pour it in the radiator because it has no minerals. It's just pure water. So it's not pure water, it's distilled water. So another thing, antifreeze, they're not that expensive. They're pretty cheap. You can buy 1 gallon for about $9, but it can save you a big headaches with a tow truck and maybe even a brand new engine because you forgot to check the level of antifreeze on your engine. So just keep here and there, just check the levels of the antifreeze, and if it's low, just add some more, and that's gonna save you a headache, and that's gonna keep you from getting stranded on the side of the road, having to call a tow truck, a friend, and then paying big bucks for a new engine or rebuild. So that's number one thing that I see a lot of people end up in the side of the road because they forgot to check their cooling system for the level of the liquid. And the second reason we end up stranded on the side of the road, and it's the most simple thing, and I don't know how we miss this, is running out of fuel. So most of us, we are in a rush most of the time, and we're just trying to get from point A to point B and point C, and we rarely pay attention to the speedometer, so we're doing a little bit more faster than we're supposed to, and that causes us to lose attention on the fuel level. I recommend to keep the fuel tank half or more. Don't ever let it drop from half or lower because you never know when you're gonna need to drive farther in an emergency situation where it's gonna get you out of your routine and you're gonna need more fuel than what you actually use on a daily basis. So I always keep your fuel level half or more on the fuel tank, and that when you run out of fuel and you end up on the side of the road, now I see a lot of people getting a gallon or 2 gallons of fuel just to get them to the next gas station so they can fill up the car. So now you go get your 2 gallons of fuel, you come over and you put it on your car, or you call a tow truck where they give you service and they fill up your tank with maybe 3-4 gallons, and now you try to start your car, and guess what? Sometimes the fuel pumps, they go out because they were not cooled down by the fuel that was in the tank. These new fuel pumps are electric, so they work with electricity with a 12-volt system, and as long as the fuel is covering the body and there's fuel going through the fuel pump, it's cooling down the unit. But what happens when it runs out of fuel? Well, the fuel pump starts getting hot, and if there's no fuel there physically to cool it down because it's cooled down by the fuel, well, what happens is it starts heating up, and eventually it burns out. And now you thought that just by pulling fuel into your tank you're gonna solve the problem, but no, guess what? You just created a bigger problem for your car because you ran out of fuel and now you burn your fuel pump in your car. That's why we recommend to keep it halfway or more of fuel on your tank. Don't let it drop half or less. So that's the second most common reason we end up in the side of the road, because we run out of fuel, and sometimes it actually destroys the fuel pump because there was no fuel to cool it down. Another reason why we end up stranded on the side of the road is because we never or rarely checked our oil level on our engine. So if we don't check our oil level, then if the level starts dropping and dropping and dropping as we drive the engine or the car, then we end up with a lubrication, starvation of lubrication. So then it's gonna get you a bad oil pump, or it's gonna even get you to a scenario where the engine is gonna seize up because you forgot to check your oil level and it just ran out of oil and you end up in the side of the road. Now you gotta call a tow truck, and then you gotta find a new engine or transportation, or if you had to buy a car and that purchase wasn't planned, so now you're in a situation where you're gonna have to purchase another vehicle or do something about this. But this is one of the reasons that we end up in the side of the road, because we don't check how much oil our engine has in there. So if you don't check and you don't have an idea how much oil you have in there, you're gonna end up stranded on the side of the road. So just check the level I'd recommend every week to just get an idea how much oil your car is burning or is leaking. And if it's leaking oil, you want to take care of that leak. So once you get an idea of how much oil is using, then you come over and you start adding oil to your engine, and then you get it to the right level, and you throw one of these quarts of oil into your trunk, and then you just carry it around in case you need some more oil. Then you just keep adding some oil, so you don't leave it. You always have oil ready to be added to your engine when you have it on the trunk. And another reason we end up in the side of the road is because we end up with a broken belt. And sometimes we don't check these belts, and we ain't driving for a long time, and there's years going by, and the belts dry out, and they start getting cracks on them. And we're gonna show you what a belt that is about to snap looks like. So if that belt snaps and you had the alternator being driven by it, now you have no source of power to the battery, and then until the battery runs out of power, then your fuel is gonna be injected to the injectors, or it's gonna be pushed to the injectors, but the computer and everything, all the electronics are run by 12-volt power. So if you don't have the alternator to feed all that system and keep it up, the battery is just gonna feed you so much till it dies, and then you're gonna end up in the side of the road. And hopefully you're in a good situation where you end up in the day and you're in a safe zone, because sometimes when this happens, you don't know where you're gonna end up. So you wanna avoid those situations. And one thing I wanna say, if that belt was driven the water pump as well, now you created a second problem. Your car might overheat because the water is not being moved around in the engine. So now you are creating a second problem, and hopefully it doesn't get worse than that. So check your belt, and if you haven't replaced them in a few years, replace them, because that wouldn't be a bad idea. And we're gonna show you what a bad belt looks like. We want to show you this belt, folks, and look at this. So many options. The whole belt is like this. So if you have a belt that looks like this, or is getting to look like this, you might want to replace it, because if one of these cracks is just enough to snap this belt in half, and now you're gonna end up with no power, or no cooling system with a water pump, or no air conditioning. So it's gonna affect. So check your belts and replace them if they're starting to look like this, because they're not that expensive, and they can get you from having a tow truck or a new engine replaced because it overheat because the water pump wasn't moving at all. And another reason we end up in the side of the road and we are having so much trouble is because we have a low spare tire that we took out of our trunk of our car, and then we put it on the car, and then we lower a car, and now we end up with another flat tire because we never checked the pressure on that tire before we took it for a drive. So make sure that the spare tire has the right amount of pressure, so when you need to use it, it's ready to go, so you don't end up with another flat. And another thing is that some people take it out and they don't carry it on the car because the space or the weight of on the car. So when you need it, it's not on the trunk. And if you buy a car, make sure that you check that there's a spare tire, because you know that's the one thing that is gonna get you out of trouble. Even if it's just a donut spare tire, is just to get you to a tire shop so you can fix the flat that you had on, and then you can keep going on your way. Especially when you're traveling from in areas that you don't know or cross country, you want to make sure that that spare tire is ready to go. Another thing is that we don't check if we have the jack that comes on the car. So when you get on the side of the road and now you want to change the spare tire, you probably have the spare tire, but you don't know if you have the jack that comes with the car. So now you open the trunk, you start looking for all the components, and then you will just have the spare tire, but you don't have no jack. So that's another thing, we end up in the side of the road because we don't check for these components, and we don't check if they're in good condition for whenever we need them to use them, they're ready to go. And another reason we end up stranded on the side of the road and we have to call a tow truck or a friend to come and pick us up is because we have a bad battery that we know is going bad and we don't take care of that problem. So we might end up having to replace the battery anyways, and you're gonna have to do it once you're stranded on the side of the road. So why not doing it when you can and you have the budget, so it gets you, so you calculate how much you're gonna spend and time and all that, instead of just finding it by surprise on the side of the road. Another thing, you might have a broken wire, or you know there's something wrong with the wire that goes to the battery and you don't replace it, and that cuts off in the middle of the freeway. So now you can probably don't want, once you shut your car off, you can't start it because the battery is not connected to your electrical system. So now you end up with that car that needs to be towed. And other thing is that bad terminals can create a problem. So if you have something like this and you're having problems where the terminals or the connections to the battery are not getting really good contact, you might want to replace them too, because you might want to spend a couple bucks and save a tow truck from coming and spend $100 or $200, depends where you're located at. So that's another thing that can get you stranded on the side of the road, a battery problem or a connection to the battery that can get you in trouble. So if your terminal is looking like this, you might want to replace them because now you're having problems tightening the bolt that goes and compresses the terminal to the battery post, and is probably not a bad idea because they seen better days. So if your battery terminals look like this, you want to change them because that's gonna avoid you a headache or spending more dollars on an unplanned emergency. So take care of that one, you know, in a controlled environment. And the last and not least, but is the reason that we end up in the side of the road, is because we end up driving down the road and we don't pay attention where we're heading, and sometimes we hit a pothole or we hit something, and then we end up damaging one of the components in the suspension that can cause the car not to drive straight or safely. So we end up with a broken control arm, bended control arm, so bad that we can replace the spare tire and we can change the spare tire and put it on, but the control arm got bended so bad that we cannot drive the car straight, and it even affected the suspension. And so now you have a car with a big damage on the suspension just because we were not paying attention where we're driving or what we're running on into the road. So pay attention so that way you avoid big problems into the suspension system and you don't end up in the side of the road. And well, folks, we chose the 7 reasons that we see most commonly causing people to end up in the side of the road and calling a tow truck and costing hundreds of dollars sometimes because we don't check, and it's the simple things that we can check and pay attention to, but we end up in a rush that we don't dedicate some time to our own car. So just keep in mind that the car gets you from point A to point B and point C. So give it some time and check these little things. And with that said, if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here en el canal El Chano Jose.